First Draft. We're asking the question today, is TikTok digital crack cocaine? I'm John Koetsier, and today we're speaking with author and professor Dr. Julie Albright, who recently published Left to Their Own Devices, How Digital Natives Are Reshaping the American Dream. Julie, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So pleased to have you with us today. Let's start with TikTok. I mean, it gained over 500 million new users just last year. Why is it growing so quickly?
Well, frankly, I think there's been kind of a burnout going on some of the platforms like Twitter or Facebook around all the politics. It's gotten real angry, real negative. And I think that particularly young people, they started going away from that because, who wants to deal with that on a 24/7 basis? And especially, if you're a young kid, you're looking to have fun, getting into these heavy political discussions is really, not what you want to spend your time doing as a kid. So a lot of young people started retreating over to Instagram, which is more of a visual platform, more photos, more videos and things like that, and which sort of went away from all the politics. And then TikTok just took off, and which is mainly, for those that haven't seen it yet, it's a video-centric platform, and it's combined with music. I would say it's sort of a music-first platform.
Came out of Musical.ly, right? I mean, the company acquired Musical.ly and rebranded as TikTok. I mean, and I told you this as we were just prepping for the show, right? When you're on TikTok and maybe some other similar social platforms, it's almost compulsive, right? You view flick to the next view flick as you scroll through bits of content. I had to get into TikTok as we chatted for some research that I was doing, and next thing I know, I look up and an hour had gone away. Talk to us a little bit about the science here. What's happening in the brain while this is going on?
Yeah, isn't that the case? I think that it's really interesting. And these platforms are trying to bake in behavioral reinforcement. And if you think about something that's very sort of addictive, something that you want to keep doing again and again, the classic example is the Las Vegas slot machine.
Yes.
You pull the handle, you push the button, ding, 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 ding. Yeah, I won. Lights are going, ding, 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 ding. And the crazy thing is, when people win, they don't say, "Let me have these coins or chips or whatever, this ticket they get, and let me quit now." They say, "Maybe I can win again," right? And then they ding, ding, and then and then ding, ding, and then ding, 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 yay! Yeah, so. That's called, in psychological terms, that's called random reinforcement. It means sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And that's how these platforms are designed. When you're scrolling, let's say you're on Instagram, sometimes you see a photo or something that's delightful and it catches your attention. And you get that little dopamine hit in the brain, and it's in the pleasure center of the brain. So you want to keep scrolling, and then you see something, it's kind of boring, not too interesting, I've seen that. And then, there's that hit again. And that's random reinforcement, just like the slot machine. It's the identical mechanism, even to the scrolling, if you think about it. That's what those things are doing. They're scrolling along, that ding, 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 you won. And that's how these platforms are designed. They're exactly like a slot machine. Well, the one thing we know is slot machines are addictive. We know there's a gambling addiction, right? We don't often talk about how our devices and these platforms and these apps and all do have these same addictive qualities baked into them. So when you look at TikTok, it's interesting because it is a scroll, but they've actually done something new, I want to say, in some ways. And they have the vertical scroll, which is what you have on Facebook. For example, you're scrolling up on the news feed. But what this does is, if you stop on a video and you like that video, it'll restart that video. So in a sense, you've got a horizontal scroll going on pleasurable content, and you also have a vertical scroll going, both.
Yes.
So that's a little bit different. So let's say you stop on something and you watch it, it'll then auto start again on that horizontal scroll. And you may see some dance or some scene of nature or some emotional content, and you see it 2-3 times. And if you look in the contents, people will say, I watched this video way too many times. So it'll just auto load, and you'll be in this pleasurable dopamine state, carried away. It's almost hypnotic, you'll keep watching and watching. And then if you want to scroll up, there you go on the traditional scroll again to the next. And there goes that dopamine hit again. So they've kind of got you on the vertical scroll as per Facebook or as per Instagram or Twitter, but they've also got this auto scroll going on the horizontal that I think almost intensifies that draw you in, because they already know they've got you on the video that you like. Well, let's do it again. Let's watch it 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I mean, and as you do that, it learns about you. It learns what you like. It can feed you more of that stuff as you like it or share it. It does more of those things. I mean, I'm trying to remember Psychology 101 way back in the dim mists of time. I seem to remember rats, and they had heroin or cocaine. I forget what it was. You probably remember the experiment.
Yeah.
And they would preferentially go to that to the extent that I think they starved themselves or something like that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's it. And so, that's part of what happens and those studies are all based on random reinforcement, and you just keep on pushing that button to get that hit. And that's exactly what these apps are doing. And, as you mentioned and others have mentioned, you can start looking at TikTok and 3 or 4 hours have gone by because, let me just look at one more. And for those of you tuned in that really haven't experienced the platform, you might want to check it out, but the videos are short. They're maybe 15 seconds or something like that, 15, 20 seconds. They're short videos. And so it's just that quick, it's almost like a little tasting menu of fabulous. You're trying this and trying that, and then here's the next one. And it just, and that's the other clever thing about TikTok. It's always new. It's always different. And it's not based upon following accounts as much as Facebook.
Yes.
It's just based on the quality of the content. And the other thing is I've understood that they have a very sophisticated way of presenting that content. There's a page called For You, the For You page. And there's levels of review of the content. So if so many people not only view the content, which is interesting, they're also looking at replays, like how many times did you loop that little video? If you watched it 3, 4, 5 times, that's going to knock that up a little bit. How many people saw it? How many people shared it outside of? You can share it to social media. So all those factors go into the algorithm, and that'll boost it up and show it to more people. And then again, there's a second level review, and that'll boost it up. So the content that comes at you on that For You page is content that's, already been proven to be liked, shared, rewatched multiple times, which are indicators that, it's probably interesting content.
It's kind of a genius move on their part, because one of the challenges of replacing Facebook as a social network is that social graph doesn't come along with you to another platform, and you lose that connectivity. And this is just changing the game to not require a social graph as much, and just give you something that you enjoy watching, enjoy interacting with. Let's talk a little bit about attention span, and of course we can get into the old fuddy-duddy thing here. The new thing is obviously awful, right? But let's talk about the attention span of what it does to people when they're looking at these things that are 10 seconds long, whether it's Instagram, whether it's TikTok, whether it's other media as well. And flipping. What impact does that have on people's brains? What impact does that have on their abilities in other areas, whether that's school, your students at university, USC, or even work?
Right. Well, there's something happening that I explore in the book. Values changing, behaviors changing. Our brains are changing based on this interaction with digital technologies, and one of these is time compression. So it's this idea that our expectation of how quickly things happen are changing. Our attention spans are lowering. So the idea that you have to take focused attention to, read into a book or really think deeply and things like that, it's harder for people to do that are really immersed in these digital technologies. So that becomes very difficult. And I think also attention span in terms of patience for things. One of the stories in the book that I explored was a fellow who wanted to revisit some of the favorite movies when he was a kid, and his son's going into college. And one of the movies they revisited was 2001: A Space Odyssey. Yeah, I don't remember that movie. And, you know, when he was a kid, that seemed very cutting edge and futuristic and exciting. And, you know, wow, this is amazing and gripping. And so he wants to watch it with his son and share that moment and that excitement with his son. So they are watching the film and it's starting. And if you remember in the beginning, it's like
it's a half an hour of no talking.
Yeah, these apes, and it's kind of like what it shows is man has discovered tools, and he's hitting something, and so it's like an ape that's going to become a man, and that's that moment of discovering a tool. But and it's interesting, but the fella turned to his son and said, "Well, what do you think?" And he's all excited, reliving the moment, and the son goes, "Dad, it's been 11 minutes and there's still apes." So at that moment, my friend goes, it like recalibrated in my friend's mind, like, wait a minute, it has been 11 minutes and it's still apes. So this idea that, what seemed gripping and interesting, and it made my friend relook at some of the other films and all. And he was talking about how in some of these early Oceans films and all, that the everyday scene, the setup for the movie, were like 30 minutes long. And he said, now you're like right into the car chase and right into it. And he said, it seems now boring and pedantic and plodding what seemed interesting, back in the 70s or 80s or whatever it would be. So I think that the perception of the pace of life is shortened, and the pace of change as well. So people expect things to happen quicker. I had another student of mine, another example, say, well, I'm trying to be a songwriter, but if I'm not successful in 3 months, I'm thinking about changing to do something else. 3 months? I said,
never mind 10,000 hours.
I know. I said, it could take 3 years. I said, honey, 3 months, that's not nearly anything to think if you're going to be successful in a career. Like, you might as well give up now if you're only going to give yourself 3 months to get there. But that's the mindset. See, it's like if it does, 3 months seems like an eon.
Yes.
At USC, a professor friend, remember they used to say, what's your 5-year plan? You need a 5, remember that? You got to have a 5-year plan. So he says to the students, and he's 70 something, he said, well, now what's your 5-year plan? And the students looked at him like he was insane. 5-year plan? What are you talking about? That's like an eon. And they couldn't even conceptualize a 5-year plan. So that just shows you right there that this time horizon has really shortened as a result of the constant quick churn of digital content. And so the horizon line has really moved, towards you. And the 5-year plan is out of mind, out of sight, out of mind at this point.
Exactly. It's pretty interesting. I did try and watch 2001: A Space Odyssey with my 16-year-old son.
Oh.
And he was like, this is the worst movie ever. This is the worst movie in the history of the world.
Did he have the same
when is something going to happen?
Yeah, nothing's happening. Let's get this going. And it's funny because now if you look at it through that lens, you kind of see that too. It's like that scene, by the way, the opening bump with the ape, that went on for 11 minutes.
Yes.
I mean, if you think about that now, it's like that is an eon. And imagine when you've got users who are used to 15-second videos. And, here's another stat that'll get you. Young folks, if a video doesn't load up like on a website or something in 2 seconds, they're on to the next thing.
Yep.
So that's called latency in computer terms. The idea that you have to wait is latency. And so I call this the desire for a no latency life. They want it right now. And if there's latency in anything, then, off to the next thing.
What's the challenge with that? And you pointed out correctly that it's not just kids who are impacted by this, that the example of the person who talked about watching that movie again, he felt the same way. And if you and I go back and maybe we watch movies even from before our time, 40s movies, 50s movies, black and white movies, and you just, when is something going to happen? It takes forever. And I'm wondering what the impact of that is
Yeah.
Because there are things that we need to learn that take time, whether it's mathematics, whether it's concepts in psychology, whether it's concepts in business or technology, other things. There are things that we need to learn that you need a foundation of knowledge. You need to build on
Right.
that foundation of knowledge. You need to understand some difficult concepts and work hard to figure those out,
Yeah.
and use those and apply those. Can people context switch and switch into a mode where they can give something focused attention,
Mhm.
or does this have long-term impacts on how they act and react in all contexts?
Well, I think there's two parts to this. One is our habits, or our ways of thinking about what we're doing. But the second is, and this is kind of perhaps even more concerning, is the fact that now we have a group growing up now as digital natives, and particularly younger people. But what you've got now is babies, infants who are growing up in a world of mobility. So the idea that they have this, iPads and phones and things, they're growing up in bassinets with an iPad affixed over their heads, or
Yes.
with a phone, or working an iPad before they're acquiring language. So what that's doing is it's rewiring their neural pathways in their brains. They are going to think differently than you do. So this idea that babies are going to have a different experience in terms of, again, the pace of information, the pace in which things happen. And I think fast forwarding, we have a real mental health crisis going on amongst young people now. And I think part of that becomes, it takes a long time to become successful. As you're mentioning, it takes a long time to become a master of something, to have, acquire that knowledge and that mastery, whether you're going to be a doctor or you're going to be a plumber or whatever it is. It takes a long time to learn your skill set and to be an expert at something. And I think that, somehow we have to get that message across to young people that, you have to give yourself time to develop, to become that master, to have the experience. Here's another example that'll just show you. In the workforce now, digital natives think they should have a promotion within the first year.
Yes.
And a lot of them think they should be like a senior. I had a senior vice president of Huawei come into my class. Student popped up her hand and said, well, they're just going to graduate college. And pops up her hand and said, well, now, how do I start out at your level? And he was about 62 years old. He looked like we slapped him in the face. Like, what do you mean? She wants to start at senior VP of a global multinational company. And there was no irony or humor. She thought, well, why aren't I starting at your level? And he looked like this, and he was trying to be polite.
Yes.
And he said, well, how's he going to answer this? He's in front of a class that he doesn't know. He's not in a little conversation. And he says, well, you have to have something to bring to the table. You have to have some experience. Another kid pops his hand up and says, well, now, how do I get that experience? Can I just read a book or something? And these kids were not kidding. And I was like, I am so sorry afterwards. I couldn't believe it. But that's the thinking. Can I just watch a YouTube video or something? So this idea that it takes time to learn, I think we have to get that message across so people don't become hopeless, is my point. I'm telling you some funny stories, but hope is on the horizon. And if you cut the horizon off, you see, you're stuck in this churning now. And if now doesn't look really good, well, then, maybe I better just check out. That's the problem.
Absolutely.
The whole factor of the future has been cut off for a lot of these young people. We need to reassert the future.
Super interesting point. And yet you can see where some of them are coming from some extent. We can learn so much more than we could before. YouTube does teach us a lot of things. There are courses online from so many universities that you can check out. So there are ways of, in some sense, short-circuiting the process, but there's also some of these softer skills, people skills, management, leadership skills, even personal development skills that do take some time. And it's not just about taking a chunk of knowledge and inserting it in your brain.
Right, which people will hope. Yeah, and that's another thing. I think a lot of young people, a new study came out that said that teenagers are more likely to be talking to somebody over a device than they are talking face to face during the course of an average day. 65% of teenagers are more likely to be talking through a mediated form of communication. And when they go out into the workforce, you're suddenly going to have some, as you're mentioning, social skill deficits. Some of my students, I had them call up a guy from a major auto manufacturer to do a project. And I said, hey, talk to this guy, work at a project, and great. And the guy seemed great. I talked to him for about half an hour on the phone, funny guy. Next week I come to class, I said, hey, how'd the call go? Not very good. Well, what happened? And they go, there was an awkward silence. What awkward silence? And I was like racking my brain. Did I hear an awkward silence? They called this guy up and said nothing. They just sat there. So I was like, oh my gosh. So their thing is they haven't had experience talking on the phone. Yes. How do you break the ice with someone you don't know? How do you make a cold call? How do you start a conversation and things like that? And so my brother came in and gave him like a 101 on breaking the ice with a new client.
Nice.
My point is they're not dumb. But if you look at the stats, about 90% of the time when the iPhone came out, it was used for making phone calls. Yes. And 10% was using apps. Well, now it's 90% of the time using apps and only 10% of the time actually making phone calls. So they don't have the experience with face-to-face, without a mediated device there, or with phone calls and things like that. So there's a skills deficit emerging.
Super interesting. At least that person made the call. That's probably a big step right there. Just picking up a phone and making a call is really challenging. A mental challenge.
I didn't think of the fact. Otherwise, I would have primed them for what to do and how to strategize the call. It didn't occur to me that they wouldn't know how to make a phone call. But this is what we're living in now. So now, you have to step back and make some of those interpersonal skills more clear.
Yep.
The path more clear.
Yeah, exactly. Let's surely this rewiring of the human brain has some good impacts as well. It has some good effects as well. Maybe I'm wrong. What have you seen in your research that people are better at or perform better at when they grow up this way?
Right. Well, I think that people are able to. The world's become much smaller. So I think in some ways we can understand other people better. And in fact, millennials are most likely now to consider themselves citizens of the world.
Yes.
So this idea that, the world's become a little smaller. I mean, this started with CNN in the 24-hour news cycle where you could see a war going on as it was happening across the world, and it suddenly became more real. Well, now young folks are able to have friends, and there's these networks that enable them to travel, like things like couch surfing, and go crash on somebody's couch or on a floor or somewhere with someone, and things like that. Work away where they can go work for other people. So there's these networks available that allow people to have more worldly, global experiences in a way, to have friends and keep friends over long spans of time and place. And I think that it's also enabled distant families to kind of almost get to know each other better. You can see that cousin across the country and what they're doing and their hobbies and things, and keep in touch in a way. Long distance phone calls were expensive.
Yes.
Before that, letter writing so slow. You'd have a connection, but it would, the span of time of that would be long. Now we can just text somebody anywhere in the world. It's really quite amazing if you think about that.
It really is. It's transformative. I mean, FaceTiming or WhatsApping somebody, right? Yeah. It's a really big deal. I know we need to wrap this up. You've got things to go, students to teach, boards to run, all those other things. Anything else? What have I not asked you maybe that I should have?
Well, I think that, we started talking about TikTok, and I think just sort of wrapping up on that, I think that's really the platform to watch for people. It's on the move. It was the #1 most downloaded app on Apple. It's young. In the US, most of the users are, 16 to 24, globally under 30. So, for companies and brands and people, to kind of keep an eye on it and think about how they might want to integrate that into their business. It's a very interesting platform in a lot of ways.
Excellent. Excellent. I can't thank you enough. This has been so wonderful to have you on the show. We've been connected for a long time.
Yeah.
Really enjoy seeing all that you're doing. You're having tremendous success with the book. You're traveling all over the world, signing and talking and influencing. And it's wonderful to see. I wish you all the success in the world.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you for the wonderful conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. For everybody else, thanks for joining us on Tech First Draft. Whatever platform you're on, please like, subscribe, share, or comment. And if you're on the podcast later on, please rate and review it. Thanks so much. Until next time, this is John Koetsier with Tech First Draft. Goodbye.
Thank you.